The World Trade Organization has concluded a landmark bundle of deals, including on fishing and food security. This at a conference in Geneva that went nearly 36 hours over time last week. Negotiations toward banning subsidies that encourage overfishing and threaten the sustainability of fish stocks was on the agenda. Well, for more on this and just to understand what other important deals were agreed, I'm joined now by the Minister of Trade, Industry and Competition, Mr. Ibrahim Patel. Minister Patel, good afternoon and thank you very much for your time. Hopefully the past weekend gave you time to relax a little bit after that marathon session of the WTO. Can you please unmute, sir? Sorry, sir. We can't hear you. Maybe
I'm sorry about that.
There we go.
Then you're absolutely right. It was a marathon session. We had ministers from about 164 countries present in Geneva doing negotiations deep into the night. And in fact, we were only able to clinch the deal at about 5 a.m. on Friday morning. And we had, you could see in the course of those negotiations, some of the colleagues from some countries were rearranging their flights. So there was a lot of drama in it. But in a way, what the World Trade Organization needed to do, it needed to show that global trade policy is relevant in a period when there is increasing talk of a global recession and certainly a slowdown of global growth. There were key areas that business people, workers, consumers were looking to the World Trade Organization. And in the end, it emerged with a package of 5 areas that constituted the basis going forward. And it's the first such agreement since at least a year and a half before COVID.
Yeah, before we unpack those 5 areas, would you share, I guess, the view that was expressed by the WTO Director General, Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, that this session produced unprecedented package of deliverables?
I think given the recent history, if you take the last 10 years, this was perhaps the most significant range of issues that was agreed. Arguably, the founding conference of the WTO would have had a more significant set of agreements, but certainly in the last decade, a characterization would be a fair characterization.
Okay, for you, you've mentioned there were 5 key areas. In my introduction, I mentioned the fishing part. We've also heard about the vaccines, and we've heard about food security. For you, what stood out?
What stood out for me was 3 key areas that directly affect citizens in their day-to-day lives, and one longer-term thing that we need to think about. So the 3 key ones with immediate impact was vaccines, fish, and food. The ones that require a little bit of further work is on e-commerce and, importantly, the reform of the World Trade Organization. Then, it's not often recognized that South Africa was poorly represented in the talks that led up to the formation of the World Trade Organization. Since the end of the Second World War, there was an organization called the GATT. It was the Generalized Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, and it was a treaty-making organization. And as we were getting ready for our transition to democracy, big trade talks started in Uruguay. It became known as the Uruguay round of GATT. That was in the late 1980s. And they concluded an agreement in 1993, which was then given effect in 1994, literally as South Africans were queuing in our millions to cast our vote. And so the old government locked South Africa into a number of commitments that we subsequently paid a deep price with job losses and loss of industrial capability. So for us, this conference was about trying to ensure that South Africa's voice is heard, that we begin to claw back space for our own policy. And that's why WTO reform is so important. It sounds like a dry topic, but it's really about what are the rules by which we sell and which we buy on global markets, not just the things that you can touch, your tangible goods, but also services. And so that for me was the other big standout in the talks.
Now, will these deals, Minister, have any impact on any existing trade deals that South Africa has entered to over the years? You've mentioned the various areas that I highlight for you, like fishing, vaccines, and food security. But this country has entered into agreements with America, for example, the famous AGOA types. Will this deals package, have any impact on existing deals?
No, it will not directly impact on bilateral trade. So when we do a package with the European Union or we do a package with the United States, those are called bilateral agreements. They would be influenced by the architecture of the World Trade Organization's deals. But these deals that we've concluded in Geneva covers all countries, all 164 members of the World Trade Organization. So they don't go into the detail of the bilateral agreement. So let me give an example of that. The agreement on fisheries would set new limits to what countries across the world can do on the high seas and also in each other's territorial water. So that's not something that we would typically negotiate with a single country like the United States or an economic bloc like the European Union. That is something that all countries have to commit to simultaneously. So that's what these talks have been about.
Okay, Minister, thank you very much for your time this afternoon. That's Minister Ibrahim Patel, just sharing some of his views after that marathon session of the World Trade Organization took place last week, successfully ending in a number of deals being clinched. He's highlighted 5 areas, and 3 top of mind. It's fisheries, food, and COVID-19 vaccines. But it won't impact on any of the existing bilateral agreements. Certainly, that is good news. Now.